Hi guys, Dr. DeFeo here, and this DV video series is a little bit different than the other ones. We're going to have different modules of videos, and then after each video, you're going to answer some questions. So let me just show you that first by bouncing to your assignment that you should have open in front of you. Once I input all the videos, you'll be able to click on them. But essentially, you're going to watch the video, take notes, and then answer this question. So this first question: if hormones reach every cell in the body, why do some cells respond to specific hormones? So you type your answer here. In class, I'll be able to check and provide feedback while you guys are doing that. And then you can check your answer. I really ask that you, to get the most out of this assignment, that you only check your answer after you've thought of your own answer, and don't look at the answers ahead, or otherwise it will ruin the fun. If you're far off, or if you miss something, or if you want clarification, I highly recommend going to your textbook to check that out. And so we are in chapter 26, and that's where you can find it. Okay, so back to the video. So today's goal is to get a better sense of what the endocrine system does and how it's able to establish long-range cell-to-cell interactions. And hopefully by the end of this end of the day, and at least for homework, you'll be able to model how cell-to-cell communication occurs from a distance through chemical signaling. Okay, so let's take a look at this individual here. So this individual, this tall, very tall individual, 8'11", is Robert Wadlow. And he is what's known as a pituitary giant. And he's a good example of how interfering with the endocrine system can affect development, because the endocrine system is critical for controlling developmental changes and respond to stimulus, and changing environmental signals, whether they be internal or external. And so he is a pituitary giant because there's actually a tumor in his that pushes on his pituitary gland. What we're seeing in a second is that the endocrine system is composed of many different glands that secrete hormones. And so this particular tumor disrupts pituitary gland function, causing there to be too much growth hormone, which is called, or abbreviated sometimes as GH, which the pituitary gland secretes. This growth hormone goes throughout the rest of the body, causes cell division, and for the differentiation of different cells to grow the body, and you get your pituitary giant. Also, more contemporarily, and a really important issue in the environment today, given the amount of synthetic chemicals that we wash down our sinks that end up going into the aquatic systems, is what's known as endocrine disruptors. An endocrine disruptor is a synthetic chemical that mimics the different types of hormones that we have in our body. And this is not something, this sort of developmental problem is not something restricted to humans. It's found in all animals. And so an endocrine disruptor, this particular one, atrazine, looks just like estrogen. Estrogen is what we'll find out is a hormone that's responsible for giving female characteristics. And a scientist studied frogs and the effect of atrazine on their ability to form what's known as an amplexus. And this is actually just the process of the male frog gripping and mounting the female frog in this fashion. And when they looked at this and they compared frogs that had normal weight, very similar very similar weight and genetic background, what they found was that in the presence of atrazine, you can see that there's a much greater increase in the number of male frogs that were unable to form an amplexus, versus forming, and then also for not only were more unsuccessful, less were of course successful. And so what will happen is that this endocrine disruptor, atrazine, disrupted gonad function, which is critical for producing, in males anyways, testosterone and giving it its ability to perform mating rituals, and not only that, to become a male. And so when there's too little testosterone, what we find out is that the frog will go through demasculization. And not only were they unsuccessful, but this is really crazy. 10% of the genetic males, so they had an X and Y chromosome, developed capacity to lay eggs. They became essentially female, which is really amazing that they were able to lay eggs even though they were in fact male. So these are really kind of scary things to consider. And one of the extension assignments I would like you to kind of consider is, do endocrine disruptors in this way affect humans? Can there be synthetic chemicals that can affect males and turn them into females? Right. So, what are the nuts and the bolts of the endocrine system? Well, the endocrine system, like the nervous system, uh, it gives the body a capacity to communicate using chemicals. And so, what you'll have is you'll often have a stimulus in an endocrine cell, and these cells are found in glands, just a collection of tissues that secrete specific hormones. There's lots of different glands. We'll see that in a second. They're able to secrete these hormones, which travel through your bloodstream, and they end up going to a target cell. So you have a stimulus hormone, they travel a long distance, and they go to a target cell. And this target cell is able to respond because they have receptors. Very important that they have these receptors, and they have specific shapes and chemical capacity to recognize these hormones. Um, so what's interesting is that most of the time these signals are very diffused. They're able to go to the blood and circulate through the whole entire body, eventually making it to their target cells, which makes the speed slow. It's a long-lasting response. So once you start producing testosterone, for instance, you will have a baseline level and you will maintain your male status. Versus nerve signaling, which is a direct connection from your stimulus through neurons directly to a response tissue. Notice the signal, in this case, the electrical signal travels down the axon and directly interacts with another neuron on its way to a tissue. This direct connection of the nervous system is what's different than the endocrine system, where the signal is diffuse. Not only that, the signal is very fast in microseconds, milliseconds for the longest neurons, and it's a short duration. So very critical for quick changing responses to the environment. Your brain is able to take all that in and cause your skeletal muscles to move against the bones, and you can get out of the way of something that's coming at you or something like this. An analogy to keep this in mind to help you distinguish between the endocrine and the nervous is Facebook versus Gmail. Facebook, you can post a message on Facebook or whatever social media you want, and the target audience, if they like or dislike what you're reading, they have the ability to receive that information, and they will decide if they're going to respond to it. So this message is up there for a long time on Facebook unless you take it down. But in the meantime, many people will make comments, and not only that, if you post something that's not necessarily flattering, that sort of effect can last a long time, and people's impressions of you can change. So be careful what you post. Versus the nervous system, which is like Gmail. You're directly emailing somebody. It's quick, fast. You get a response, hopefully, if the person is responding quickly to you. And so these two are good analogies for it. And interestingly, epinephrine, you may have heard about this, is really critical for the fight or flight. What's neat about the interactions between the endocrine and the nervous system is that you have tight coordination between them. So much so that epinephrine is not only a hormone which signals in the endocrine system, but it's also a neurotransmitter which is able to help propagate a signal from one neuron to another. So just because you're a chemical or an ion like calcium, it doesn't mean that you're precluded from interacting in one versus the other. You can actually be in both systems. Okay. We have seen this before. Water-soluble hormones are those hormones that are small peptides, amino acids. So one of the classes of hormones that we've been in contact before, where it binds to receptor through the signal transduction, there's a shape change, a conformational change. Write that down if you forget how this signal is relayed. These relay molecules will detect this shape change, will detect the chemical difference, and they themselves will change, causing cellular responses, ultimately gene regulation. For instance, this is ADH, your favorite hormone that starts the endocrine system. And as you can tell, these are just these proline, cysteine, asparagine, gluten. Those are all amino acids, and they're connected in one long peptide. Peptide is just a covalently linked amino acid chain. Most glands tend to produce these water-soluble hormones so that they can move in the blood. However, there are another class of hormones I want you to be familiar with. They are lipid-soluble hormones. They are often steroids or small molecules made from cholesterol. You can recognize them by these big rings that are here. These are hydrophobic molecules so they can cross the membrane directly, interact with a receptor protein within the target cell, and together as a complex, they act as a transcription factor initiating response. Most sex organs and the adrenal gland will produce steroid hormones. So testosterone, for instance, is made in the testes, as well as estrogen in the different glands of the female reproductive system. All right, you've made it to your first question. Answer the question and then start the next video.